in transformation into value. Now, guys, value is the most important aspect over here because you get all sorts of data in today's world, but it really matters what kind of data you are actually going to capture, and that's what matters. So, anything that has very high volume, by high velocity one means to say that something that is very fast, something like you're going on a website, you're clicking stuff, you're trying to understand what are the different things inside it, you're browsing, that is a high velocity data. And variety, by variety I mean you're particularly like, I mean you're not limited to one particular activity on the website, right? You can track the time on which you were on a website, you can track the kind of ads you were looking at, what portion of the time did you look at the ads when you were on that website. So these are all the different aspects of big data in today's world, and where we can apply analytical methods on it. And the third most important point, guys, big data is high volume, it's high velocity, and there is high variety of information assets that demand cost effective, innovative forms of information processing that will enable you to get some insight, some decision making, or some form of process automation. As the backhand method, always try to remember that the simplest definition of big data is something you cannot view in Excel. So let's look at a huge aspect of big data. What are the different sources of big data? I think in today's world, everything that you see is connected to some kind of social media platform, and you must be using Facebook, Instagram, Skype, Twitter. Even in the India Today websites, you might have seen they have put a discuss login for gamers, or for any kind of researchers. You have something called Discord. I think people use such kind of things. So there are certain major sources of big data, and the companies like Facebook, Google, deal with this, and we want to understand how do they segregate the different sources of data, because you can't just put everything together, right? So let's look at how we can learn about the different kind of industries where big data is used, and we will also try to cover some of the use case in retail industry using identifying the kind of products that can be sold together. So the first major three category are people, machine, and organization. So by people, I mean that people are quite active on the internet, that I which I just mentioned to you. So they go to different kind of social networking websites such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and they share a lot of information through posts. It can be something valid opinion, maybe some political issue, some post that you particularly saw in the particular post or something like that, or somebody went somewhere to some hill station or beach. So this is what we call it as shared data. So data that is shared by the people, and you can also put in information like movie ratings or product ratings in a particular website, and these can be termed as the data that is generated by people. The next important thing, guys, so let's look at machine. So data that is generated from machine or computer in a periodic manner, or at the occurrence of some kind of event. So if you are using any kind of system logger, or let's just say you have used Windows for this particular, you must be aware about something called as event triggers. So an easy example would be, if you press the power button in your computer and you press shutdown, it triggers an event which tells your computer to shut down all the tasks and processes and turn off your computer. So that is event driven data, that is periodic data, and Windows will collect this information so that if there are some kind of errors or any kind of issues with the system like that, you can actually take a look at it and understand what was the exact issue which was causing this particular problem. I mean, that's just an example. So this is an example of machine generated data. So other kinds of examples are data that is generated from cell phone towers. And if you are aware about, in today's date, all the vehicles have RFID or FASTag associated with them, right? So what happens is, the data from these tags is actually scanned and then stored. So car sensors and RFID tag scanners are also categorized under machine data source. The next important point is data that is generated from organization. So by data from organization means organization generates, lots of different kinds of data, and most of it is in well defined structure. Some of the important organization data are internal sales data, or if they want to store a particular customer's demographic data or information, that is also categorized under data that is generated by organization. And what do companies do? They integrate it with external data sources and try to generate useful insights from it. So they also archive some of this data, and this helps them to generate a comparative analysis with the latest data to understand what is the change in trend, or what particular thing improved, what particular thing went down, and this will help them to understand what will be the prediction trends in the future. For example, the sales of cold drink will be much more in the summer season, or maybe you try to factor in the sale of particular kind of medicine also. That is also a big source of organizational data. So those are some of the three broad categorizations of data, and there are the other sources of big data that you can see on your screen, which is like media as a big data source, cloud as a big data source, the web also can be targeted as a big data source, IoT, which will again fall under machine based data, that also will be under big data source, and databases, as you might have already guessed, is also big data so stores. So under each of these bubbles, you can try to see like what are the different kinds of data that you can extract from these particular sources. And I will ask you to mentally divide it into three parts. That is, whether it is, a machine generated data, whether it is generated by people, or whether it is generated by an organization. Let's look at the most important aspect of big data, which is, what are the different types of data. So before even understanding like what kind of volume the data is going to have, it's very important to understand the kind of data you will be looking at. And for that reason, there are very three basic key requirements for any kind of big data system. Number one is that it should have the ability to store huge volumes of data. And the second important thing is, since you already have the data, now you should be able to process that huge volume of stored data with yourself. And the third important option will be, to have the flexibility and the scalability to accommodate the growth in data. So these are some of the few most important aspects of having a big data system. Now let's look at an example. So I will take a very basic example of LinkedIn. So if you look at LinkedIn, in 2009, it had only 37 million users. But if you look at 2016 and you try to calculate the trend of the data, it had grown from 37 million to 467 million. So you can understand that it had an exponential growth in data, and hence the need of big data systems. Hence we have these three very important points when we are looking at any sort of big data system. Now the basis of the modern distributed file systems that you see today, or which is known as the Hadoop distributed file system, was originally conceptualized by Google. So Google engineers had a very interesting task to tackle, because you see, if you look at Google, it tries to basically search the entire web for you. It tries to gather all the different kinds of websites that are available out there. It tries to index it and store it, for so that when you do the search using Google search, it is readily available to you, because Google is partly doing the job for you. Now, the important factor over here is that Google is not going to store it in only a single file system, because those are millions of web pages that you are seeing, and they have images, they have lots of different things inside it. So they really wanted to store the data in a distributed manner. So what do I mean by distributed manner is that if you look at the basic computer system that are present today, let's take a look at the the laptop on which you might be viewing this tutorial today. Now what happens is that you have a single hard drive present inside, which has the operating system present inside it, on which you have these applications running. For example, this particular browser that you are using, or maybe there will be different drivers and all sorts of programs for which you will be running this. A distributed file system means that you will not be only storing in a single you know